Welcome to the Crazy Wisdom Podcast. Today, my guest is Leon Ko. He is the founder of AmplifyIntelligence.ai. He's an AI advisor. He builds agentic workflows, and he also does AI adoption workshops. So, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much for having me, Stuart. Longtime listener, so it's great to be here. Exciting to talk to you today.
Yeah. The agentic workflows. I would love to talk about agents with you because I was a bear on agents, on AI agents. And for my listeners, probably already know what
Mhm.
autonomous agents are. They're, things that can go out and take action on your behalfs without having direct examples of what you want from them. They can just go and do it. And I was a bear until the Replit agent came out and it started building applications for me. And so all of a sudden, then I
Yeah.
switched to, oh, okay, they are here, and this is happening a lot quicker. What's your take on them?
Yeah. So my first kind of perspective is I define AI agents differently than most. So it's funny. I have back in Notion. It was from February of last year. I was writing out this blog on how, hey, the next thing it's going to be called like large language uh, action
Yeah,
models or agent action models. So I call them llamas for short. Now, if you're in the AI space, you know
yeah.
the llama name was kind of taken over very quickly by the models that that Meta put out. And so I've been pretty bullish on large language models being combined with action for a long time. But my simple version of what an AI agent is it's just anytime you put an LLM and traditional code together. Because fundamentally, they're very different media. Traditional code computes things, they're from computers. And LLMs do something completely different. So anytime you have those two working in some sort of workflow or tandem, that's an agent to be. Now, some people call that
Mm,
just an agentic workflow, but some people on the further spectrum, an agent needs to write its own code. It needs to make planning decisions. But ultimately, at the end of the day, all spectrum of AI agents can take action. I also personally am partial to my definition because an LLM plus a code is very replicable to what is in corporate companies today. We don't have a lot of autonomously running software hardly anywhere that's non-deterministic. So
uh,
how helpful can that be? Obviously, it is helpful. I've
mm,
used the Replit agent. It's very interesting and very good, but that adoption will take longer. It's less deterministic versus agentic workflows. You
mm,
can bring that into your business today with still tons of benefit,
mm.
right?
So an agentic workflow. But it's you said the problem with the replit is the non-deterministic. It's probabilistic. And how is an agentic workflow deterministic? Is that what you meant by that?
Well, it's
Yeah.
more
Or
deterministic.
deterministic.
So agentic workflows, you can think of them like Zapier workflows, but
Uh,
with intelligence
uh,
infused.
got it. Got it.
So you've got steps where you're bringing in things from the internet or from other APIs. Then you're putting them into an LLM. Then you're getting obviously a non-deterministic output, but it might be a document that we can structure really well. And then you can take that,
Mm,
you can send that to another LLM to do something with it. Bring another piece of information from outside and you can string all those together 5, 10, 20 steps, and all of a sudden you might go from something uh, the same beginning input document into something really profound at the end versus the replit agent. It never knows what you're going to say. You're probably going to start with a loose idea, but it might be a design doc, it might be one sentence. That's pretty difficult to engineer.
yeah, very interesting. So yeah, this is a new take. I have not heard of this specifically. Have you used, there was, I think it's Gumloop. The Gumloop was the YC
Mm-hmm.
company that is like a Zapier,
Yep.
but with AI stuff. Do you think they're approaching it right? Do you think, and this gets into the conversation I've been having a lot. So save that question and think on that. But then it gets into the productizing LLMs. There are only three examples of a product that I use outside of the normal chatbot thing, which is Cursor,
Mm-hmm.
Gamma, and Perplexity. Those are the
Mm-hmm.
three sort of consumer products that have a really good take on a productized thing. And so, would you include Gumloop in that?
Gumloop's a little bit different,
Mm.
and there. I haven't used the product as
Yeah.
recently. I used it when it came out and it had a different name.
Yeah.
Um, but my big challenge then was I didn't have enough model customization. So one
Mhm.
thing that our firm brings as expertise is a wealth of knowledge on 30, 40, 50 different models. And additionally, when you're building agents, you really need to be able to fine tune the parameters, repetition penalty, context window, and you need to pick the exact right model because you might be doing tons of calls over and over and over. And if you are forced into using Sonnet 3.5 at $3 per million input token,
Uh-huh.
but then I can use Gemini Flash at I think it's 0.0375 per million input token, and
Yeah.
I can get that to work just as good as Sonnet on my use case. Well, then
Interesting.
and I call it 10 times. So that was my original issue with Gumloop was they had massive limits on the context window size. So I actually couldn't run my workflows in that tool because I
Mm.
couldn't stuff enough data in. And so a model like Sonnet 3.5 has a context window, which is the maximum amount of tokens you can stuff at 200,000. But the new Gemini Flash models can take 4 million tokens. And a token, you can call it like 1 to 1 or 1 to 2 with a word.
Yeah.
So, like, you can do a lot with prompt engineering examples into a model like Gemini Flash to get it to perform like Sonnet 3.5 if you know what we're doing. And that's kind of what we help people with. And that is so critical for unlocking agents is the cost to get that cost down to be able to use better faster.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
Gemini Flash is up to almost 200 tokens per second in speed versus something like Sonnet is 60, right?
Yeah.
So
Okay.
that's a big deal.
Yeah, and it's changing my understanding. It's congruent with a lot what I've been thinking a lot about, which is that actually we were talking about this with the database, the fact that, and I would love
Mm-hmm.
to go into that specifically, the what you mentioned in response to what I said, which is that I've started to think about the Web 2.0 model of having a database no longer makes sense because what you're doing, you're creating API calls, calling the model basically replaces the need for a database because you don't need to hold, well, parts of the database, because you don't need to
Mm-hmm.
hold these static sort of understandings and things. Like everything is now more much malleable. Um,
Mm-hmm.
yeah, I would love to hear your response on that, whether you think that's true or not, whether these API calls to LLM models are actually obviating the need for a database.
Yeah, I wouldn't necessarily agree that it's eliminating the need for a database because there's some data that we have to know that it's exactly correct, right? When Stuart logs
Mm,
in
yeah,
with an
yeah,
email,
yeah.
we definitely want to provide his data. But additionally, in workflows within that, there are times when we can use the model to emulate and return wide different types of information that
Hmm.
we used to would have to store in a database. So I'll give you a kind of cool
Exactly.
example.
Yeah.
So I was doing this prep for an AI adoption workshop, and they were doing reviews for a like product reviews. It's like a product review company. And so I wanted to show how ChatGPT could write mock product reviews with mock testimonials. But in my actual conversation, what I said first is, "Hey, uh, I said, think about and simulate that you created 10 different full reports with testimonials in between them." So I had it think and simulate 10 different ones. And then I asked for the testimonials out of that. And
Uh,
then later I had it regenerate the full report. So I used it to use its own creativity that the testimonials existed inside a report and then give me those testimonials. And then later in the chat, I needed the full report. So I had it produce it. Pretty cool.
Very interesting. And so, yeah, I really like the nuance you gave, which is that you are going to need a database for anything to do with user data or anything that's related to a
Mm-hmm.
real human being. And I think this
Mm-hmm.
shows what I was talking about earlier in terms of that database. I was specifically talking about somebody was trying to do a Web 2.0 approach of getting all of the classical books inside of a database so that they could then use
Oh,
it
yeah.
against an LLM so that LLM could use what's on
Mm.
Wikipedia, basically. And um, and so Yeah, but it reminds me that the world of computation is vast, and it really decide like it all depends on what you want to do, because you can do almost anything with computation. And now we have this new, and that was just with deterministic computation for the past 40
Mhm.
years. And now this thing is shifting pretty strongly to this new thing. And I like what you do, which is that it's not you're combining the deterministic with the probabilistic
Yeah.
together into a way that's helping people solve these types of problems. So what are the types of problems that really fit with this probabilistic new paradigm?
So it's there's kind of two things. There's the broad frontline adoption where people have not been able to access one millionth of what their computer actually gives them. So many people lack the computer skills, right? There's a funny tweet from a while back that's like, your laptop has $1 million stuffed in it. You just need to hit the right keys,
Yeah,
right?
yeah,
And that's
exactly.
kind
Yeah,
of all of us working is like, we just have to keep on hitting the right keys till we make the amount of money, produce the product that we want.
yeah,
So there's so many people who don't use keyboard shortcuts. There's so many
yeah,
people who don't write programs for
yeah,
themselves. And then now there's this whole new lever, which is AI. And even the people who use the keyboard shortcuts, who write code, who build products, they're seeing tremendous benefit. But the challenge that I'm seeing is programmers have a set of mental models
yeah,
or intellectual scaffolding,
yeah.
and they bring that to their conversations with ChatGPT or other LLMs, and they can really pull it apart, twist it, turn it. But when I talk with non-technical people, most of them are not as familiar. They don't think about building in abstractions, building loops, building automated workflows. And so we're going to have to teach them how to think more in a computer programming oriented way to get LLMs to do better, higher quality work for them, right?
Mhm. So
So I think that is the biggest one. And then the second is taking existing workflows and infusing intelligence within it, where there would have been elements. And that's why I go back to agentic workflows. If I was writing a blog and I think Stuart's really smart, I send that off to him. Well, now I either wait on my hands or I go to a different task. What if I instantly get feedback in Stuart's style or something approximating 80%? Now we're really compressing the gears that prevent business from going forward, right?
mhm.
Well, you have to really understand how to do something that emulates Stuart's style and understand the limitations of that response and that query back. You have to have a pretty deep understanding, even though it can do it today.
Okay, very, very good territory that we can get into. So, taking existing workflows and infusing intelligence into them, can you give an example of that? You already gave a couple, but I want to make it clear because let's go into my understanding of what an old workflow could have been, particularly inside of an
Mm-hmm.
automated thing. So, say like Zapier or something like that, where I have after this interview, the recording is going to be saved
Mm-hmm.
on Dropbox, and this is something I've been trying to build for a long time.
Yeah,
After that, it's going
I
to
love it.
save to Dropbox, and then I'm if I then don't mark this email immediately in my Notion document, the episodes to publish, then essentially then it gets lost in this giant folder of Zoom meetings, which is very like it doesn't have the name of the person that I interviewed. It just has some numbers in it before.
Mm-hmm.
And so a great Zapier that I've wanted to build for a long time, which I've tried many times to build, and I actually tried this on Claude a long time ago. Didn't quite get it. Now I'm thinking with O1, it might be able to go into it. But what I would
Sure.
want to do is a immediate like a webhook as soon as that's done, then upload it to my episodes on to publish on Notion, and just like combining Dropbox with Notion. And so that's like a dumb
Mm-hmm.
automation. Can you flush
Yeah.
out more what
Yeah.
intelligence looks like inside of that, and like what is your thought of where that can go?
100%. And I love this example. One, because, yeah, I personally would find it very useful. But yeah, you're 100% right in that this is very assembly line, but digital 101. And so you're approaching it, you're just trying to get the logistics of it together. But let's pretend like we hand waved it, we paid someone $1,000 and they just stitched it for us. Okay, so that's saving us some time, but there's no real intelligence that we're getting.
Mm,
So let's
yeah,
pretend what
exactly.
we added into that workflow was it's going to automatically extract all of the key insights. What if it's going to take all of those key insights and put them into a database that goes into key insights for every one of your podcast episodes? But it's not just the basic key, like, that's level one stuff. Stuart has his own mental models and
Yeah.
frameworks that he's really big about. And so what if we said, like, what if we trained a prompt or something to find the key nuggets from the transcript that Stuart's unique mind would really want to hold on to the future?
Yeah, yeah,
And
yeah.
then it was taking those and putting those aside. And then what if those later were converted into fodder to be social posts in the future, or once a week you just kind of had a cleaning function that went through and took all these unique insights? And I would be interested in this personally if I got a recap email or a LinkedIn post and it was just like, here's the 5 biggest nuggets that I thought were like standout, high signal, interesting from my conversations this week. And you're
Mm,
having high signal conversations. But let me take this just one step further. This is a podcast. We're having high signal conversations. How is business done in a remote first global
yeah,
way today? Everyone's basically having just internal Zoom calls,
yeah.
which is just like, no
Yeah.
offense, low signal podcast, just high logistic work. And who's taking notes? Someone getting paid $50, $100 an hour to take notes. So we're not only going to automate the note taking, and we're going to bring that down to a cost to multiple fractions of a penny, but then we're going to add all that intelligence on the back end. And so even the most basic implementation is going to send out an email to all the attendees and say, here are your action items
Yeah.
as we understand it after this call. Is everyone good? Because how many times do you get on a Zoom call and you black out afterwards? You're just like, I totally forgot what we talked about. What was I supposed to be working on? Now I'm too embarrassed. I'll circle up next week and
Yeah.
hope no one noticed that I didn't do anything. This is where the real impact happens. You don't have to be a far off, imaginative, technological futurist. Just implementing meeting note taking and sending out action item emails, that's like 0.5% of the GDP that we're moving just
And
because we're eliminating real friction.
and there's already a bunch in there. We've got one in the room right now called Fireflies.ai note taker that kind of
Mm-hmm.
does that. And I realized that if I were still in a business with a lot more of those low signal, just with action items that I would have to do, then I would
Sure.
be doing a bunch of, I would find a use for Fireflies, but actually in my podcasting, I don't find a very much use for it because I'm already recording the call and I already put it through to the script as a part of the processing for each of the different
Mm-hmm.
podcast episodes. So actually, I don't pay for it anymore. Not sure how long it's going to continue to show up for my meetings, but so that's already in there. So people are already doing that. Were you talking about like implementing a note taker inside of it, or yeah? Well, actually, let's get into this. The artisan software.
Yeah.
How are you technical? Were you already building applications on your own before all this started? And then if not, are you leveraging AI to do it now, or are you just working with other people who are technical? What's your technical background?
Yeah. Well, and I'll handle the Fireflies thing.
Yep.
Fireflies has an API. So you can build all this
Mm,
on top of Fireflies. The reason you don't like Fireflies is to really hammer the point is there's no Stewart in it. It's just generic business
yep.
action item
Yep.
summary. And
Yep.
even that alone, if you
Yep.
were doing 4 hours
Yep.
of boring calls a day, you'd be like, yeah, Fireflies, $30, no brainer.
Yep.
But if I sold you a $300 Fireflies or you built it that was like Stewart's true alpha finder,
Yep.
then
That's
you'd be like,
different. Yeah,
okay,
yeah, yeah,
now I'm
yeah,
kind of
yeah, yeah.
interested.
That's
So,
a good intelligence. That's the perfect point of the intelligence of what you're talking
yeah.
about, of how to include intelligence into a product. The Fireflies isn't
Mhm.
exactly intelligent. It's a kind of intelligence, but what you just talked about is another level of intelligence inside of an
There's
automated workflow.
levels.
Yep, yep. Yeah.
Exactly. So, to get to that, the
Mhm.
personalized version, each person would be able to build their unique kind of flavor. And I'm not
Yeah,
super
interesting.
bullish on that each person builds their own Fireflies, but customizing elements of the analysis unique to what they need, I think we can do that. Most of that is just prompt engineering and getting the right data in.
Yeah, interesting. Yeah, it's super interesting. Okay, let's go into the technical question. What's
Sure.
your history of being technical and such, and how's that changed?
So I started out, I was a business student in college, so I was not technical, and I got involved with startups, and instantly, I started learning how to build websites, and you just go step by step by step, and that was quite a few years ago now, and so I'm not a software engineer, but I've definitely built, a handful of apps and Python scripts and stuff for myself, and where I see where the tools are today is you still need a level of creativity and knowledge. But what I explain to people is the logic of applications, you have to come and bring that. You have to bring the vision. But the grammar, when I was first
Yeah,
learning how to do all
interesting.
this stuff, I miss an apostrophe and I've got no clue why my app's not running.
Yeah,
Now I tab
yeah,
or I just describe what I'm doing and I can read the code and understand, oh, okay, it misinterpreted this or misinterpreted that. Versus I work with people obviously in the workshops and education where they are able to write code, but then when things go wrong, they don't know what that file does on a conceptual
yeah,
level.
yeah, yeah.
And so there's still education, right? If you're building a Next.js project, you know that there's some front end React components. And if you've done any work with React, you know conceptually what that needs to do. But then you also know there's an API folders to build your API routes. And when I ask them, where in the code is this thing doing this action? If they can't find it, if they don't know what file
Yeah.
to even start going to look for, they're in, they're in trouble. And that is the barrier today, right? From writing just true code from someone who knows nothing. But even those people, I'm working with people right now. And my big workflow recommendation, I don't see people doing this, but I think it's absolutely killer. Number one, go into Claude, 3 5 sentences description of what you want to build. Then you take that and you say, hey, write a PRD or a design document. And it's going to write a little document describing the app. But then go in and say, hey, write the pseudocode for this app. And pseudocode is like code,
Yeah,
but it's not the actual like grammar. Like I said, it really looks more like logic.
yeah,
It's like, hey, whenever I hit this button, this variable goes and this happens. So then I can take all three of those things and go into Claude. And if you go into into Cursor and
uh-huh.
you go into the Cursor composer with a pseudocode or a workflow diagram and a PRD,
Yeah,
you can build a
yeah,
lot and
yeah,
it's going to
yeah,
be
interesting.
really impressive, all just from one short description.
Yeah, that's great.
That's all you did.
That's a very cool one. So are in the workshops where are the workshops in person? Are they online? Are they inside of companies? And are you teaching them how to code or how to use AI to code?
Not teaching them specifically how to code. Typically, they're primarily online.
Yeah.
But you have to first assess where
Yeah,
people
they
are
are.
within
Yeah.
the
Yeah.
right. Because I've done workshops where, people, I have to introduce them to the idea of ChatGPT. And if you go much further than that in that first hour long call, I mean, it can get overwhelming in a hurry.
Yeah.
And then I teach workshops with people who use ChatGPT every day. And if you don't advance into the advanced techniques like that pseudocode that I taught, or another one I love is screenshots. You can do so much with screenshots and adding them to ChatGPT, but I do it with little graphics in Canva.
Oh,
So I get the little Canva templates, and then I'm like, hey, write copy that fits into the little blurbs or sections in Canva. So that's what I'm saying. It's really a synthesis of the creativity and your own creativity of where the tools are at today. It's not just like stuff is done for you.
wait, with the Canva thing, what are you doing?
Yeah.
You're taking a screenshot that you take into Canva and then put it
Canva
into
template.
ChatGPT?
So there's a Canva template and it's the pure template. I want to turn it into a YouTube banner, but I want
Oh,
to work on my copy. But the copy needs to fit the amount of
oh.
space in that Canva thing, right? And
Yeah.
so I can essentially infuse it to say like, hey, limit to only so many characters,
Oh,
but it's an
cool.
implied
Yeah.
action.
Yeah. That's really good. Um,
Yeah.
and
Lots of cool stuff
so
like that.
there was a question I had about Uh, oh yeah, well let's go into the more philosophical or the trend or
Sure.
the future of where all this is headed
Mhm.
because you talked about, it can get overwhelming and you're teaching people the basics of how to do chat GPT and then I'm sure you're also doing more advanced work. And for those of us
Mhm.
who know where this technology is, it's like, oh, that's no big deal. I was actually just showing my cleaning lady today the chat GPT voice thing and it was really
Oh, that's
funny
awesome.
watching her reaction to it.
Yeah.
And it was just like she didn't know what to do with it because it's this thing that sounds like a voice or it sounds like a human. It sounds like a human. So it's like there's this sort of like awkwardness and this thing and it's
Mhm.
and then we had a conversation with it while we are going. And what do you think about future shock? Like, where do you think a lot of people are headed for future shock? If you were to pin the zeitgeist of the people who aren't extremely online, where do you think it is right now, and where do you think it's going to be? Like, do you think that we're just going to continue
Yeah.
to advance very quickly?
I think things can happen very quickly, but I'm definitely more measured than most.
Yeah,
I have the good fortune of not being in California, and so my everyday life, I'm able to see how the majority of the economy operates,
yeah,
and
yeah,
I'm able to see what people are working with, and then I'm also pairing that with my experience online and with my clients and everything, and finding that middle ground. And so that's why actually I think the AI adoption workshops. That's why I found that center is so many people, in California who are exposed to the level of AI advancement that I am, assume that everyone else in the country is like them,
no, no,
that they are interested in adopting new technology, are interested in learning how to utilize new technology. And they think if there's enough money or pressure or financial incentive or just personal interest in learning, that it will just spread across, as if it was the iPhone.
yeah,
Um,
yeah,
Tons of
exactly.
people
Yeah,
every day use ChatGPT, but saying that ChatGPT can create apps because you're a programmer and you know what to
yeah,
tell it,
yeah.
and equating those two things gets you into a very different world. So I think things are going to happen on a fairly aggressive timeline, but not like in 3 years the economy doesn't exist. And I talked about this on a prior podcast where we have this kind of vision of an autonomous economy, and my question is always like, who makes the money and why? It doesn't make any sense to me.
Yeah,
I understand how there can be a world where AI agents do things on our behalf for us and make money or pay us,
yeah.
but uh, that is very different. There's a lot of economic incentive for people to not live in that world. There's a lot of money and jobs riding on that. Do I believe in some level of technological determinism? Yes. Because I
Mm,
understand that there will be economic pressures tied with this, right? But do I believe there will be immediate overheaval because a tiny subset of people have access to immense power? No, because we look at all the models today, and many of them would, if we had them 5 years ago, would have been termed AGI, probably almost all of them. So the cart keeps on
yeah,
pushing
yeah,
forward and the
yeah.
economy keeps on pushing forward. And my thing is empowering people to become more creative and to be more productive. And if they do that within their companies, everyone's going to be good.
The goalpost, I love how the goalpost of AGI are shifting. I also really liked what you said about the sort of grounded perspective on a grand overarching
Sure.
like change to the
Yeah.
economy and that it seems really like it's going to be slow. You mentioned something really interesting, which is you compared the chatbot to an iPhone.
Mm-hmm.
And the chatbot is really interesting because I think for a lot of people who weren't very familiar with what was going on with GPT-2 and GPT-3, who weren't really
Mm-hmm.
familiar with that they weren't expecting the chatbot to be the first consumer interaction, the consumer fire to be lit about what happens with AI. I think most people building software were expecting it to be very behind the scenes, like a new application in a sense, the new application
Yeah.
was the chatbot, but I think they were
Yeah.
thinking it would like flow into things like Notion or other things. And that's been crazy because Notion hasn't done a great job of the AI integration. There's a lot of products out there that have tried to integrate Notion, but they have so much technical debt with a completely different paradigm that it feels like it might take them a significant amount of time
I
to
agree.
actually integrate this. So what is going to be the sort of, maybe it is going to be the iPhone with AI on it, with a fully integrated iPhone. But what is going to be that, in like, chatbot, 200 million people using ChatGPT feels
Hmm.
very just like stuck at that number. I haven't checked lately, but 200 million
Hmm.
people seems like worldwide. That's the people who got onto AI immediately. And then what
Hmm.
will be the product integration or the change that will make it, if it's not in 3 years, but maybe in 10 years, what will
Yeah.
convince most of the masses to use AI?
Yeah, that's a great question. And you know, um, to get the answer to that question, you're gonna have to contribute to the fund that I'm raising. No, I'm just playing. If I had the answer to that question,
Yeah, right.
obviously
Yeah,
I'd be
exactly.
raising and
Yeah.
investing immense amounts into that specific thesis. The exact form factor is definitely incredibly difficult. I do think that voice will bring on a lot of people. Do I think advanced voice mode, as
Mm.
was released this week? Probably not. There's a lot of challenges with voice, and that's actually where I got my start in AI. 8 years ago was in voice AI and personalizing it for certain demographics to that were not tech savvy. And so there's a lot of challenges. But to go back to your point about ChatGPT, I started building on the base model of DaVinci, the
Mm.
GPT-3 Instruct. And so that prompt engineering was totally different. And there's many different generations of AI adoption, and what level of tech they got access to really shapes their understanding of it.
Interesting.
And
Yeah.
people who got access, uh, people who are machine learning people, really didn't pick up to the LLM phase,
Yeah.
because machine learning to me
Was
is a
cars.
lot like Excel
Yeah.
on steroids, because it's the dimensions. It's a very mathematical orientation.
Um,
But LLMs are multi-dimensional, billions of parameters. It's very a fluid geometric type of thing. And so when you work with base models, and then we learned, before they even launched the instruct, we had to give it instructions. So then they tuned the instruct model.
oh.
And then only about a year after that came the chat model, which is basically a tuned instruct model. And so, what will the next paradigm be after that? I don't know. I certainly was not anticipating chat at the time. I thought instruct was like, cool. Like, I give it an instruction, I give it a couple examples, and it wrote a personalized email. This is absolutely wild. That's what I thought in 2021, right? And then, and then Chat GPT, even the 3.5 that came out, it was like, whoa, I can just talk to it, and I don't have to give it
Mm.
instructions, and like it just kind of understands and talks back to me, and that's really fluid. So a voice version of that seems super powerful, because the power of speech is so natural. We can say things so much faster than we can type them. There's so much less friction. There's so much greater
Mm.
expression. And
Mm.
so I don't know what the next input modality will be, but some sort of um, voice chat seems logically reasonable. But that doesn't mean it's the end state. Certainly.
Yeah, and it almost doesn't need to be another input, although I think voice is you're accurate. And then first of all, I love what you said about the DaVinci. I didn't realize that that's the way that it flowed from
Hmm.
DaVinci and having to give it to instruct, and then instruct leading to ChatGPT into the chat
Hmm.
model input feature. That's really interesting. I didn't realize all of that. Voice does seem like it's pretty profound. I've definitely been it is I no longer need to hire a Russian tutor anymore to teach me Russian, because now I've got this voice AI, which is pretty good. I actually just tried the Meta voice today as well. And it is not as good. It can't speak in other languages, but they're going to get there very quickly, knowing what
Sure.
Meta's goals are. Um, I loved what you said about machine learning as well, and the multi-dimensional type of thing, and trying to understand that. But it doesn't feel like it has to be another input as well, because it could like just giving what we have with all these different APIs feels like
Mm-hmm.
it's just about re-engineering the current web to take advantage of what we have already, not even taking into account more versions of the GPT or taking into account different types of algorithms like a whole new transformer architecture. And I was reading some really interesting stuff about how Google is using chip design, AI enabled chip design within them to then improve their TPUs and such inside of Google in really interesting ways. And it just feels like this is a great point of what you talked about earlier about how you're in a normal economy and you're not in California. But people like you, people like me, people like people in California who adopted this technology are going to get access to a large amount of power. And it's not like the traditional power sense, although it might be related to that of like a king having power over an empire
Sure.
or something like that. It's like just massive efficiency and
Mm-hmm.
massive productivity that is more
More
related.
utility.
Yeah,
It's more like a
utility. Yeah,
utility,
yeah,
like
yeah,
electricity.
yeah.
Um, but it's weird because, electricity, you don't think of that as an intelligence technology. But what we always do is we take the old medium and we put it in the new. So the first original TV shows were radio shows with video. They were literally radio programs. In it's only years and years later that we find the
Oh,
actual kind of product market fit for that new technology. And that's why I think, in some sense, maybe the scary thing for people or the exciting thing is it's pretty likely that we haven't found the AI product market fit as this new media.
yes, yeah, yeah. Mm-hmm. Okay, what you said
But
about
think
it?
about
Yeah,
so
go for it,
much
go
we
for it.
can do. Think about how much we can do with this non-product market fit AI.
Yes,
It's just
yeah.
like absolutely incredible.
Yeah, that's a good question that I'll come to later is what does product market fit look like with the current generation
Mm-hmm.
of AI? What you what you said about radio and TV shows reminded me of the loom that you sent me.
Mm-hmm.
McLuhan Media. It's something I've been talking a lot about. I would love to get your perspective on where we're headed. And so
Sure.
it feels like to me that social media as we know it was only basically a product of having cable news being able to push new things into social media and social media being able to do its viral thing to push things back into the TV. And so, but the idea of the TV where millions of people are there at the same time watching this thing and having that influence, that feels like it's got a limited time window on it. And once that goes, once people stop going to one TV station, this has a lot to do with
Mm-hmm.
age and the millennials versus the boomers and such. But once that whole thing sort of doesn't exist, I mean, you can definitely challenge me on that if you don't agree. But then if that's true, where are we headed in terms of a social media, in terms of where we really only pay attention to what we're already paying attention to? There's figures like Elon Musk who can make a tweet and have 100 million people see it, but in general,
Mm-hmm.
that's just not the way it's going to go. And the sources of information are just going to fracture and fracture and fracture. And what do you think about that? What's your, do you agree with what I said? Do you disagree? What's your take?
Yeah, McLuhan has a really good line about the TV in the 70s or so, and talking about how, everyone was sitting at home in their couch watching TV, and they all knew their neighbor was doing the same. And so, in
Yep.
some sense,
Yep.
they were all kind of
Yep.
sitting on the couch together. And it was a very
Mhm.
integrated time because, like you talk to any older person, they talk about we only had five, TV stations. They all basically said the same stuff.
Yep.
And obviously, we've kind of outgrown that paradigm. We've gone to a more personalized paradigm. Even something like YouTube kind of sits in between TV
Yep.
and a product like Reels or TikTok. And I mean, there's a lot of analysis that you can go there, but part of the strength of AI is its ability to generate hyper personalized things.
Yeah.
It's an extremely personal generative media. And the issue with TV is it's kind of the opposite.
Yeah.
And so it's
Ooh.
naturally the technologies and the social technologies we use today are naturally disintegrating and at its fundamental element. And so you think to previous times, and that really has a big effect on our identity. People had much simpler, smaller identities. You were someone who is an American, you were a factory worker, you were a father. Maybe you had 3 or 4 adjectives that you described yourself. And many people today take to many different identities because they have so many different
Options.
environments, media environments that they play a part in. And the challenge with those identities is you can sometimes not know your standing, and I think that can be very
Yeah.
unstable feeling for people. Is when you're the factory worker and you're at home and you're the husband, whether you're the top dog or the lowest on the totem pole, at
You know
least
where
you
you
know your
are.
standing.
Yeah.
And a lot of people today, I think, are not comfortable where they stand because sometimes they get a TikTok that makes them feel on the top of the world. And sometimes they see something on social media that makes them feel at the bottom. And, unfortunately, I think that's if you're not grounded outside of your digital reality and your real reality,
Yeah.
that can be very challenging for a lot of people.
This is a great point. And it reminds me of what I've been thinking, and I think I was talking about it yesterday, was that if we go back to the printing press, because the radio and the TV were very different from the printing press, but in this sense, it was also pretty similar. Like, because the printing press all of a sudden allowed people like Martin Luther to share his heretical tracks on the church and what the church was doing, and allow to sort of
Sure.
subvert and he was the first social media influencer, but just with text. Just with text. It was just this, almost like language models. It's like just the language. You only had the language which
Yeah.
you read. And then the radio came around, and all of a sudden you had influential politicians like FDR giving fireside chats and feeling like he was in the room with you. His voice was in the room. And there's a very big difference between voice and text.
That's why I'm so big on voice. But
Yes.
think about text and think about misinformation today. People talk about social media misinformation. Martin Luther was the original disseminator of
Of this.
massive misinformation
I love
because
that.
what did he do? He removed 7 canonical books from the Bible and then disseminated them massively to other people when the Christian canon, the biblical canon had already been set for 1200 years.
Whoa. I had no idea
So
he did that. Uh,
yeah, many people don't, and that's quite unfortunate because he convinced a lot of people that books were added later when in actuality he removed those books 1200 years later when it was completely agreed upon. And most people agree that the Catholic canon was the Old Testament canon, which is different than the current Jewish Old Testament. It's because the Old Testament canon by Christians was agreed upon and finalized before the Jews themselves actually finalized their own
oh,
version of the Old Testament.
wait, when did
And
they do
so
that?
that's why Martin Luther, many years after the Catholic canon was
Oh,
was done.
I had no idea about
So
that.
that's actually the big split. Is Martin Luther sided with what the Jews ended up agreeing upon, but he also publicly stated that he did not like those books and had them removed, and it was clearly a very personal thing.
Wow.
So yeah, it's actually a very big point. Your technology, the technology and the ability to disseminate that is really critical. But that's
Yeah.
not true.
So, I looked up on Perplexity, what did he remove? And he remitted the
7
Tobit,
books from the Old Testament.
yeah, the
Yeah,
Tobit, the Judith, the Wisdom, Sirach, Baruch, 1 and 2 Maccabees. Uh,
correct.
and okay, and so that's really interesting. And so then we got the radio and we got the TV, and then all of a sudden the radio switched into the TV, and not only did you have the disembodied voice that was coming out of the radio in your
Mhm.
homeroom, feeling like FDR was right there in the room. Now you literally had the image of him as well, and or the image
Mhm.
of JFK, and the voice, and you had to be telegenic, and including you had a good voice for radio and also telegenic, and then
Yes.
now we're in this place where not only is the medium, the time at which everybody's synchronous together is disappearing, but also
Mm-hmm.
you're going to have AI generated characters who, for most people,
Sure.
can't tell the difference. Even for people who do have good discrimination, will eventually probably not be able to tell the difference between real and false in terms of persons.
Seems likely.
Yeah, it seems like, yeah. What's your what like where do we go from here? Because it just feels like the media thing, which I love what you just said about Martin Luther. The media thing is going to change the world pretty drastically and it feels like it's all coming together at the same time in this way that we don't even know what the TV did to human beings. Like we're still trying to study that to understand it, and now
Mm-hmm.
we have this new thing which feels very, very influential.
Well, I love this because I'm actually going to full circle it to, the beginning of our conversation. Uh, with AI in our personal lives, in our professional lives, we're actually going to have to become significantly smarter. We're going to have to become more discerning.
Yeah,
We're going to be able to use AI even in lazy ways to build more than we could before.
yeah,
Everyone can see that from a mile away.
yeah.
But if your life is exclusively on the internet, if you're like, then what you're going to end up looking like is how people think of boomers who sit and still watch TV every night on the couch.
Oh, interesting. Yeah.
And so if you don't have real understanding and grounding outside of the social technology of the day in your family life and in your own personal development, yeah, you're going to find this stuff incredibly disintegrating. Like I said, because you're going to be told all these different things. And I took a philosophy class in college, and one of the uh, one of the studies we reviewed was a UT Austin study, and it was talking about how the brain tags things. And the brain takes in, according to this study, I'm not
Yeah,
saying it's true, but according to
yeah,
this study, it takes in everything and it treats everything as false, and then it applies it, or sorry, it takes in
that's true.
everything, it treats it all as true,
Yeah.
and then it applies a false tag if it doesn't pass a sniff test. So you're going to have to be really discerning, and how they actually structured the study was really interesting. Um, but to figure that out, but you're going to have to be really discerning on your information diet before it even reaches you. Everyone thinks about what you do with the information after it's reached you, but just as critical is preventing the opportunity to hear nonsense in the first place. I think it's why a lot of people are, very against certain, social political movements today. They don't even want to hear it because it's so painful or so frustrating or so irritating. Yeah, they don't even want to hear it. And actually, that could be a productive thing because, realistically, there's a lot of things that we don't need to worry about that are shoved in our face. Uh,
And that
that's not important at all.
and that feels like it's going to go away. Do you think that the social media news feed of what is being said is going to be the way that we move into this AI thing, or like particularly now that voice is getting moved into this technology, it feels like the having my phone around once I have a voice
Mm-hmm.
activated agent that can go take actions on my behalf, like having my phone
Pretty
around is
cool.
going to be, yeah, start to be like a thing that I don't want to do. And because once I get onto that phone and then I go on to the
Mm-hmm.
Twitter or the Facebook, and then have this news feed that just distracts my ability to do anything. There's so much going on there because it's like part of me wants it, otherwise I wouldn't be doing it. But then there's this manipulation influence. The algorithm is trying to
Mm-hmm.
keep me there as well. So it's not like it's totally a willpower thing. It's also we all are all up against AI in the first implementation of AI. And so, but soon I'll be able to give it up altogether because I'll give an example. When I'm reading, I read my Kindle or read a book. The thing
Mm-hmm.
that makes me put down the book is either, well, I'm done now, or it's, oh, that's really something really interesting in the book, let me go check online to find out
Mm-hmm.
something related to this question. And then but then I get sucked in, and it takes me like 10-15 minutes to
Yeah.
get back to the book. And so the that feels like it's going to change a lot. And but then the question that comes to my mind is the information foraging, that type of information where you go into something. That's why the feed works, is because you get oh, that person said this about this thing. That's a new insight. Or there's other social dynamics and stuff like that that people, the drama that a lot of people take advantage of. What's your thought on anything there?
Well, there's kind of two elements there. One, I heard this story from a priest or read it online or something, and he said he reads his morning prayers,
Yeah,
right, from a prayer book
yeah,
and the scriptures or whatever. And one of the parishioners was like, "Father, why don't you just bring it up on your phone? Every phone has Bible, Google it, whatever." And his point was, yeah, but this only has prayers, and that has everything else,
I love
meaning the
it.
phone.
Yeah,
And so we're going to have to be more discerning about what we allow ourselves to get sucked into. But at the same time, I think we're actually going to be able to do a little bit of fighting fire with fire. So you're right. The previous or outgoing generation of social technologies is extremely consumptive.
yeah,
But what did we talk about at the beginning? We talked about how much fun it was to use AI agents to create software and to build things. And so we're actually going to be able to, so many non technical people are going to be able to flip their relationship with the current era digital technology from a strictly consumptive one. That is, in some sense, people are feeling it's consuming them inside
yeah. Interesting.
into a productive one,
Yeah,
if they so choose to engage with the media in that way. Some people are going to use it to produce big social media followings. And I don't think there's anything particularly like wrong or harmful with that. There's plenty of social media that I consume that I find personally valuable, educational, and they're sharing what they've learned. And then they're using AI to package it in a way that makes it hit deeper and more educational for me. It's not all parasitic or
mm,
parasocial.
yes, yes, very good.
But at the same time, we're going to be able to produce so much more. These are just immensely productive technologies. And if we don't take advantage of that, we have to change ourselves to take advantage of that. And if we don't take advantage of that, then that's kind of shame on us, right?
Yeah, there's a very good point about that's I figured it out about in 2018, 2019 because I was feeling that consumption, and I love what you said that it feels like there's a great blog post to be read about it's you feel like you're being consumed inside because of the
Yeah.
consumption that you're doing on social media. That is really interesting with lots to discuss
That's a
there.
great nugget of an idea. We're going to take the transcript. We're going to tell the AI, find that, flesh that out in Stuart's voice, load up a bunch of your other transcripts. We're going to have a blog by this afternoon.
Yeah, exactly right. So I love that point, but then I figured out in 2017, 2018, 2019 when I started to feel that consumption that I could essentially create uh I could change my relationship to social media to be a note-taking device, a public note-taking device. And that
Sure.
all of a sudden it switched from education that I could use this thing for my education rather than this weird, parasitic parasocial.
into a productive
Yeah.
into a
Mhm.
productive media. And I agree. I had the same situation, but with LinkedIn, and so many people like LinkedIn's the worst. It's the
Yeah.
worst platform.
Yeah.
I've
It,
had
yeah.
met
Yeah.
so many great people
Mhm.
on LinkedIn who, are fantastic business people, interesting people, building an AI, not AI. But it only happened after I switched my perspective from LinkedIn is my personal connection network to
Yeah.
LinkedIn is a platform with immense business value and relational value to be mined. But I've got to put myself out there first and produce something that intrigues them and pulls them in and makes them want to have a conversation with me. And I've built
Yes.
so many fantastic relationships that are genuine relationships. They're not, it's not like I
Not
posted
parasocial.
something
Yeah.
and
Not a
yeah,
transaction. It's not transactional.
exactly.
Yeah. So and now with AI, that same thing is happening. So that same shift that you made on LinkedIn, that I made on Facebook and Twitter, that all of a sudden this thing
Mhm.
is there's this educational value. Now I'm finding that has allowed me to understand this chatbot interface, which is now anytime I have a curiosity, it is immediately figured
Yeah.
out. Although who knows how many hallucinations have now made their way into the
I've
hallucination of my
personally
brain.
I've personally found hallucinations. I'm not going to cite them as a thing of the past,
Yeah,
but I found if you're using the modern models to
they're less and
be
less.
quite low, unless you're doing like a really over the top, like complex, narrow use case. I personally would not worry about hallucinations unless you're also asking stuff like specifically outside of the
It's
training
training
window.
data. Yeah, yeah, exactly.
Right.
Yeah.
So it's, we do that in our AI adoption workshops. It's like, what's the stock price of Starbucks yesterday? Hey, if this has built in browsing, then it can actually probably go back and find it. But we just red light, green light, yellow light it, right?
Interesting.
Understand what things are ripe for AI to not get correct. And then what things you're probably like, okay, like I don't need to read every word of this. It's probably going to be pretty good. Give it a quick scan.
Oh man, there's so much more we can talk about. I would love to the next time we talk, it would be fun to go into what you've learned about the changing cost of all these APIs, because you had mentioned a lot about how Claude is changing its price, but then you can go re-engineer. So there's that. There's definitely a lot more media stuff we could talk about. So we should do another one in the future. But thank you so much for coming on the show. And how can people find out more about you and your business?
Thank you. It was a pleasure, Stuart. I really, really enjoyed it. If you want to learn more, you can find me on Twitter at Leon J. Coe, C-O-E. You can find our website, amplifyintelligence.ai, or just look me up, Leon Coe, online, and you'll probably be able to find me. So
Cool.
thank you so much for having me.
Thank you.